clearly you inspired him to be a para, really. How did that kind of come about?
I think there was a bit of my father and my past. So my father was in World War II, right from D-Day +6 all the way through to the end. Conrad loved all those stories, and he loved his granddad telling him those stories. Obviously, I was in the army myself, but he was a very physical being, Conrad. He excelled at all sorts of sports, and that naturally led him to want to be, an elite soldier. So he wanted to join the parachute regiment. Once he'd got through P Company, he went to 3 Para in Colchester, with the intent, he knew that 3 Para were deploying within the 3-year time frame that he'd signed on to go to Afghanistan.
So he definitely he aimed to go to Afghanistan.
Oh yes, absolutely. And it sounds crazy, but the guys get a parachute regiment tattoo, and he had a phrase when he was in Afghanistan, which was "all this for a reg tat," which is a phrase we've used on various other things. Because he was saying, you're in there in the mud and bullets, and one of his things, he could then proudly get this tattoo on his chest and probably walk round Magaluf, showing off. But no, he wanted to be a paratrooper. As I say, he was this tremendous physical being. He was a biathlon champion, semi-professional footballer, swimmer, runner. He had ridiculous endurance skills and weightlifting. He was a very powerful young man.
Very strong. So he would have had multiple choices in terms of how he wanted to follow a career other than being a paratrooper.
Yes, the semi-professional football, the football scholarship to the US were things we wanted him to crack on with. But I think he lacked the final element of confidence that he was good enough to do that. He trialled for many football clubs, Aston Villa and such like, but never quite made it. This is something he could do within the realm of his skill set.
He also was such a handsome young man. I'm sure he would have been very successful in other areas as well. I don't want to go into that necessarily, but well, why not? But so he was doing his second tour in Afghanistan.
No. Funnily enough, it was his first. And on their first engagement, because he'd now been in the parachute regiment for 3 years, and he was considered what's called a senior Tom, which is a senior private. He'd done 3 years as a private soldier. There were people in his unit who'd just come out of depot. The officer who was his troop commander was a few months out of Sandhurst and 21 years old. So Conrad at 22, he'd done a number of courses with the parachute regiment, the ground sign course to look out for the laying of IEDs and traps. So he was considered quite senior. But in their first engagement, and we actually have a video of it, he's launching a grenade launcher into a compound from where they're being shot, kneeling up. When they got back, he sat with the sergeants and corporals and said, "Wow, doesn't that take you back to 2008? And Conrad went, "Well, no, I wasn't even in then. This is my first tour." They were amazed at how comfortable and confident he was to be in his very first contact. Because believe me, there were other guys in that unit who weren't quite as relaxed in that particular contact.
I'm sure.
The guys have told us about that since. So he found himself, in Afghanistan at a checkpoint called Quadrat, which was meant to be quite a quiet little place. It ended up being the most kinetic checkpoint for the regiment at the time. I think 80% of the casualties that the regiment got were from that checkpoint, and it seemed to be getting hit quite hard by the Taliban, to everybody's surprise. Conrad was a machine gunner, so he should have been at the back of all the patrols. But again, his age, his seniority, the fact he'd done the ground sign course, he volunteered to become the Valon man, which is the lead guy, carrying the metal detector. But you're the front of every patrol, and you're leading every patrol. It's during this time that a stray dog had kind of adopted him, or the regiment had adopted, or the troop had adopted Peg. How did that come about? When they took over the compound from the previous soldiers, Peg and another dog were there. Now the MOD's policy is, get rid of them, either shoot them or get them out of the compound, because they, rightfully so, may have rabies or parvo or something. But these guys aren't going to do that. We're all animal lovers. There's the last thing they're going to do. So they look after them. Now the interesting thing about Peg was she would go out with her soldiers on patrol. She's not a military dog. She's a Helmand stray. But her food source was leaving the camp, and she was going with it. And
Very bright dog.
very bright dog. And she would, Conrad would describe that she would spot things. So she's not trained in any way.
Yeah.
But if the earth was disturbed, she'd spot it and sort of spook and walk round it.
Really?
So he said she's always really useful, but she was always at the front. She's since done that here. If there's anything on the walk that we're on that wasn't there the day before, she'll take a little route round it.
That's amazing.
People have seen her do that, and it's true.
So she was alerting him, and he was there with a detector. Or is that right?
Yes, he'd have the Val on, which is like a metal detector.
Yeah.
He's also looking for signs on the ground.
Yeah.
You've got to go slowly enough that you can pick up those signs.
Yeah.
And it could be that a wire has been run across the road, or there's a pile of stones that weren't there the day before hiding an IED. There's a wire that's leading to be pulled by a member of the Taliban. All these things.
Terrible pressure, this.
Yeah, and you have to go slow enough to catch these, but quick enough not to be ambushed.
Yeah.
But Peg would be out with her food source, and then he wrote to us and said, look, they had a 9-hour contact one day, which is 9 hours of fighting.
Wow.
And we've got a picture of Peg just lying next to the medic's bag. She went to sleep in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
We had dogs at home, so if there was a dog to be played with or adopted, it was going to be his.
Yeah.
He'd written about it, but when he came back, we did have that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I'd had the conversation about you doing a very dangerous thing. 2 things he said. If anything happens to me, just get on with it. You know, don't mess around.
Wow.
And also, I've heard of this guy who gets dogs back. So your job is to get Peg back for us.
Yeah. That hits me right in the heart. That extraordinary that he would also have that foresight at that moment in time to make arrangements for the potential loss of his own life. That's extraordinary.
Sadly, on the 9th of February, Conrad's killed by a sniper. I was in Paris working for Nissan, away from home. My wife and daughter had left to go. They both worked at schools in Ulster nearby. Apparently the guys who came to knock on the door had been here probably half an hour after they left and stayed here all day till they got back.
Wow.
So there are 2 guys on the drive as my wife pulls in. My wife sort of chooses to ignore them because I think she knows what it is.
Yeah.
My daughter engages with them, and that's when they find out that it's about Conrad. And the first thing I got was a call. I was in my car going back to my apartment in Paris, and I got a call from my wife, which is the most horrendous thing I've ever heard in my life. She couldn't get a breath, you know, so it was...
Yeah.
And then I just knew what she was going to say, and she did.
Yeah.
And then my company, the MOD, were all absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
We got the most fabulous liaison officer who just did everything for us. And you're going through this whirlwind of, you know, you've got to go through the eulogy picture, you've got to go through the MOD announcement, but none of that happens until the family are happy. We're all informed.
Yeah.
Now we're going to release. So they talk about the fact that soldiers have been killed, and then it's a couple of days later when they release the names and the pictures. And the eulogy picture we chose is Conrad with a massive smile on his face, a grenade launcher and his rifle in that hand, and Peg under his right arm. Yeah.
That's just a showstopper. That it's I think you're incredibly brave, and it's the horror, I think, for any parent to lose a child, and in the circumstances that you lost Conrad is devastating. But you deal with it remarkably well, Tony. The worst thing that could happen to you happens, and but Peg is there.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
So very quickly on, we were talking to our friends and said, look, we've got to try and get the dog back. Yeah. What are you going to do now? I'm going to get the dog back. And luckily, a friend's niece listened to a talk that Pen Farthing gave at Kenilworth Dogs Trust, and got me his number. So the next thing I did was ring Pen and told him that we'd got a dog out in Helmand that we wanted to get back. Had been a great comfort to my son. So Pen said, fine. He said, it's not the easiest place in the world. You know, we don't sell a taxi or DHL to go and get the dog. Yeah. I mean, the coroner subsequently pointed out that Quadrat was probably the most dangerous place on earth at the time.
Yeah.
But Pen had still got contacts, but through those contacts, he made the parachute regiment aware that the family wanted the dog. There's high emotion within the regiment anyway at the time. They've lost two of their own.
Yeah.
The dog was quite well known to everybody. Everybody, knew her in various of the compounds. So they were happy to assist.
Yeah.
They secured the dog. She moved into the checkpoint called Folad. She was looked after by a Major Todd, the OC, in charge of A Company. This is your dog. This is your job to look after the dog. And then the extraction happened, and
say that again.
The extraction.
The extraction.
Of Peg, as they were leaving.
Yeah.
It's now, how do we get her out?
Yeah.
So she was put on a Chinook into the smock of one of the officers. Flown to Camp Bastion. Now, obviously, that was going to be a problem because you've got a stray dog.
Yeah.
But they'd immediately arranged for her to then get out of Camp Bastion and get to Kabul. And she ended up in a Afghan National Army Humvee at the end, being dropped off at Pen's shelter.
Wow.
And we got a photograph of her through from Pen, and it just said, "Is this her, and do you still want her?"
Oh dear. To honour.
Yeah.
To honour their own. Sorry.
They breached quite a few procedural rules. It meant a lot to them, and so once we'd said to Pen, absolutely, we want her. The next thing was, how are you going to get her?
Yeah.
And she was, so she went through all the tests, parvo, rabies, then got her DEFRA license, if that's what it's called, and started her journey here. And the next thing we knew was she was in a quarantine kennel in Nuneaton. Actually, the owners of those kennels owned a kennel previously at the end of the road that you just turned down.
Really, that's extraordinary.
So their kids went to the same school.
Yeah.
And there they are looking after Conrad's dog.
Wow.
We visited her as often as we could, daily if we could, but there'd be a member of the family visiting her daily.
Yeah.
But then you also found out that members of the regiment had visited her as well.
If we can kind of jump 10 years, really, to where we are now, and we know that Pen has done a remarkably heroic thing in evacuating just under 200 dogs, and now 69 of his staff and close family, which has been, I think, one of the most inspiring things about this disastrous evacuation that's just happened. And Pen, of course, has been, accused of putting pets over people, very derisive term. I mean, how do you feel in terms of one Conrad, and how do you feel in terms of the arc from the last 20 years of occupation? I mean, what's your response to that?
My first thing is Conrad would have been shouting from the sidelines to support Pen.
Yeah.
100%. If you think what Pen did for us and our family and other families.
Yeah.
And 1,700 other soldiers around the world.
Yeah.
If you leave your buddy dog behind, you're leaving something, that would cause me more PTSD than what I'd seen, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what they say. The Americans have a phrase for it, don't they, which is no buddy left behind.
Yeah.
Obviously, those who were positive were reporting accurately.
Yeah.
But both you and I know that there was so much inaccurate reporting and accusations and people, even government ministers, pointing at an individual who'd served his country for 20 odd years with great honour, and who then sacrificed himself over there for 15 years with Nowzad, bringing back soldiers' dogs, looking after contractors' dogs, having the finest and most progressive clinic in Kabul.
Amazing. Yeah.
Doing amazing work that other people didn't. And, going on to the embassy to look after their pets.
Yes.
Looking after animals that were serving our forces. All these things seem to be forgotten.
And giving employment to women in the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for them for certain people to turn on him, I found incredible.
Yeah.
And for me, it means those who did, because there's many who didn't. That's the other thing. Yeah. And more people supported him than went against him. Yeah. But what's wrong with a country when you actually then choose to pick on a retired 22 years served Royal Marine who's run a charity and an NGO out in Afghanistan, helping the people, what we called our lasting legacy charity.
Yeah.
You know, for all the 457 men and women who died out there, Pen for us was doing something that was helping change lives and culture in Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And that was why it was a lasting legacy program. And they forget that. But then all the facts around the rescue operation, the fact that it was privately funded, so it didn't cost the government a bean, the fact that we were bringing back dogs and cats that weren't pets, but these were owned by embassy staff, soldiers, contractors, and then his staff. So now we're bringing back highly trained staff to work in an area where we have a shortage of people. Shortly, they'll be contributing more tax than probably most of the people who are moaning about them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Conrad was the 353rd soldier to die.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were all numbers, if you remember. So I even went on the BBC and put a piece together for when the 400th died.
Yeah.
Which really, you know, wasn't something I wanted to do.
I'm sure, yeah.
But the reporter, which was Jonathan Beale at the time, said, look, somebody's going to make a statement. I like your statement. Wouldn't you like to get your statement to be the one that we play?
Yeah.
And the point was, they're not numbers, which is why that's a strange 3 at the end.
Yeah.
Time to lay this if I can. So this remembers all 453 guys on this wall. On behalf of the 353rd on there, Conrad. So for our tomorrow, they gave there today to every soldier that's on there, specifically every parachute regiment soldier that lost his life, and to the lost tribe of Quadrat, of which Conrad was a part. This is for you guys. So the whole thing was 353 is not a number, neither is 1 or 457. And actually the 3 dots there represent everybody before Conrad and everybody after. But there seemed to be a symmetry to this. There was a lot of symmetry to the whole incident.
Absolutely.
And we thought there's something in that. But actually this is born again out of Pen.
Yeah.
So Pen selflessly just got Peg back to the UK. So Pen and the Nowzad supporters, we didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how much it cost. I didn't know what we were to do about it. He just said, no, just leave it to me. You know, and this, at the time, it was a hell of a commitment he made. I ultimately found out the costs of doing all this repatriating. So we had a horse racing night at our local church hall to raise enough money to cover Peg's repatriation costs. And out of that, we then developed into this.
Fantastic.
We've now raised £1.2 million for various causes, mainly Parachute Regiment and Nowzad.
Fantastic.
As I say, Nowzad as our lasting legacy. Charity.
That's wonderful. Tony, I could talk to you for hours. I think for this moment we've covered what we needed to cover. I hope we can pick up. I'd love to talk to you more about Conrad on another occasion. And I just see out of the corner of my eye Peg's ears just popping out from behind the curtain there. So she's been with us, as she was with Conrad, she's been with us for this conversation as well. It's a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much.